Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And welcome to the third and final session of our webinar series, China Powers, Conversations on Ecological Civilization, Lithium-Ion Batteries, and Electromobility. These webinars are organized by our ERC project, Worlds of Lithium, in collaboration with the Chilean Research Cluster Millennium Nucleus on the Impacts of China in Latin America, ECLAC. My name is Cristobal Bonelli. I'm the PI of the Worlds of Lithium project, and today I'm co-hosting this event with Maria Montt, alternate director of ECLAC. So Maria, you're very welcome. In these webinars, we have been exploring the complexities of the electromobility project in China and beyond. In the first session, we discussed the Chinese concept and policy program of ecological civilization, its genealogy over the past 70 years in Chinese history, the unique globalizing aspects of this project, and its possible continuities with ancient Chinese traditions. We concluded the session with an open question. Is green development a genuine possibility or merely an oxymoron? In the second webinar, we analyzed how this technological project triggers transformations not only in China through its growing battery industry, but also in South America and Eastern Europe, creating new social and political scenarios that often transform people's lives and environmental landscapes in the name of development and technological progress. We explored and challenged the economistic logics underpinning the lithium-ion battery value chain, highlighting the need to craft more than just economic languages when discussing sustainability issues, the modernizing electromobility project, and its capitalist investments. So many topics, processes, and places were left out in these conversations, and it couldn't have been otherwise. Our goal with these webinars is simply to raise questions that challenge the modernist view that portrays modern technology as a salvation tool needed to build not only a future, but a better future. As it happens, who benefits from this future is still uncertain. Hence, we've been subtly creating space to contemplate lithium-ion batteries and electromobility not only as a remedy, but also as a poison, echoing the ideas proposed by philosophers such as Bernard Stiegler, who underscored the urgency of embracing this remedy-poison ambivalence to stimulate our critical imagination regarding technological progress in times of the Anthropocene. We hope these webinars will serve as a preamble to reimagining electromobilities in the plural form, embracing diverse projects that extend beyond the rational limits of modern technology. So in today's session, we will explore how the decarbonization of transport goes beyond a simple technological shift, bringing about profound changes in work, labor, time, and space. Our speakers will illustrate how decarbonization efforts are not limited to lithium-ion batteries converting chemical energy into electricity. And the presentations today will challenge the linear narrative of the future perfect continuous tense, which predicts that by 2060, the planet and China will have been decarbonizing due to transport decarbonization and lithium-ion battery use. However, we ask, what if the future remains open and uncertain? Today, our speakers will bring us back to the multiple presents in contemporary China, prompting reflections on the ongoing transformations in life, work, and time, catalyzed by the decarbonization of transport in this country.
Maria Montt, and I'm the alternate director of ECLAC. As a research cluster, we have been supporting these webinars to broaden the themes and epistemic languages we typically use when thinking about China and its various complexities. Throughout today's sessions, we will be trying to think about the drivers of electromobility in Chinese worlds through two key questions. First, what is work, time, and space in the worlds of electromobility? And second, how technical objects and infrastructures constitute time, and what spatial considerations come into play within and through the diverse Chinese worlds of electromobility. By insisting on the diversity of Chinese worlds, the session invites us to think of the ambivalence of electromobility in China, and to think through and with these ambivalences. We are grateful to count with their expertise from different academic disciplines and approaches. David Tyfield, Haley Kwan-Hiu Lap, and Pablo Ampuero Ruiz. Each one of our speakers will have 15 minutes to present. After the three presentations, we will have 35 minutes for Q&A. You will be able to send your questions via the Q&A function in Zoom or by commenting through our streaming platform on YouTube. This conversation will be recorded and stored on the YouTube channel and website, worldsoflithium.eu, for scientific dissemination. So, without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker for today. In our first presentation, Dr. David Tyfield will provide us with some reflections on changing space, time, and practices, configuring a kind of Sino-global electromobility civilization. David is Professor in Sustainable Transitions and Political Economy at the Lancaster Environment Center, Lancaster University, and Associate Director of Lancaster Centers for Mobilities Research. His research focuses on sustainable transition, especially urban e-mobility and associated infrastructures, focusing on ecological civilization in China, which he has been studying since 2007. His latest book, Liberalism 2.0 and the Rise of China, Global Crisis, Innovation, Urban Mobility, and he is co-editor of Mobility's Journal. Please, David, the floor is yours.
Yes, sorry, I'm unmuted. Sorry. Great. Thank you both, Cristobal and Maria, for that warm introduction, and I'm delighted to be speaking today. Can I just check before I start that everything is okay now in terms of hearing me and seeing me? Is that okay?
Yes,
I'm assuming
we
yes.
see you well.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So my talk, sorry, I'm just making a note of the time. Quick outline. I'll just recap the questions that Maria put to us, because I didn't want to just give a talk which I've always given. I wanted to respond directly to the questions that were put by this webinar. And then that takes us into some of the work that I have been doing, which is thinking about e-mobility in terms of what I'm calling a civilizational turn. This allows us then to begin to at least have a few thoughts about how space and time are being changed by e-mobility in China today. And then I'll end with some implications, or at least just raising those quickly. So here are the questions again. What is work, time, and space in the worlds of e-mobility? How do technical objects and infrastructures constitute time? What spatial considerations come into play within and through diverse Chinese worlds of e-mobility? And I want to say, first of all, that they're great questions, really stimulating, and certainly worth of a lot more research and discussion than I can give you in these 15 minutes.
Sorry, David.
Hello?
Could you share the slides with us?
Oh, am I not? Oh,
not yet.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's perfectly fine.
We can't see the slides. Okay, I thought I had done that. Let me start again. Okay.
That's great.
Can you see now? I'm sorry about that.
Yes,
Perfect.
now we can.
Okay, good. Okay, so there are the slides, and a quick outline. There's the questions, and here we are up to date. Good. And I think the starting point here, really echoing what Cristobal has already said, is that there's a problematic orthodoxy now emerged around e-mobility, which that it is still generally thought of and discussed in the press as a very straightforward issue of technological substitution for one engine type for another. And then that is associated with another narrative, of course, which points to China in particular, which is that there is a so-called global EV race between the US and China. The Europeans feature in there somewhere as well, and that China is clearly winning. What I see very slight or minimal commentary on, though, is how much more is in play regarding the transformation of society by e-mobility. So the questions that we've been put to today are really excellent, setting us on much more promising ground. But the first thing I want to do is to take a step back and to look at what's presupposed in being able to take those questions seriously. So we're going to look at the back or the ground before we come back to them specifically. And the starting point here is thinking about, sorry, I just need to change my screen again. No, I don't know how I can get rid of that. Right, okay. So yeah, the default here is what has emerged as transitions thinking. In fact, I'm just back yesterday from the Sustainable Transitions Conference in Oslo. And a lot of that work, it's commonplace across geography, sociology, STS approaches to exploring space and time as social relations. So this is in terms of structured inequalities. Here we see, for instance, an underpass, clearly armed with anti-homeless infrastructure there. So this is a space that is for cars, not for the homeless. And with that, in turn, that has led to the so-called mobilities turn and indeed the infrastructural turn. So here, this is an exploration of differentiating mobilities and immobilities, asking questions such as how is e-mobility enabling or disabling different social practices and for whom? Who is mobilized and immobilized by e-mobility? When is that voluntary or compelled and how? And there are numerous examples of this. So in the UK, for instance, a political hot potato regarding e-mobility or sustainable urban transport has been the ultra low emission zone in London. Another example would be the electric two-wheelers, especially during lockdown, who is, again, as I say, compelled to move, who cannot move, electric vehicle charging queues on holiday, the elderly, enabled or disabled by these changes, etc., etc. So the first thing I want to add to that, I'm not gainsaying any of that as an important agenda. I think it's essential, but I want to add to it, is to say that we also need to understand e-mobility and the changes it's bringing to society by bringing into our discussion a first-person and phenomenological perspective. And Cristobal again pointed to the post-phenomenological philosopher Stiegler there, so there's obviously a resonance in that. And as soon as we start to look at these kinds of questions, we also are looking at issues of desire and expectation, of aspiration and frustration. Indeed, I think once this comes into our view, we can begin to explore the way in which the unfolding, the unrolling of e-mobility and its adoption across a socio-technical system brings with it, or is shaped by, a broad disposition and relationship to the world. In particular, I want to highlight two things here. I think that the adoption of the electric vehicle, and this was in fact what I argued just earlier this week at that IST, the Sustainable Transitions Conference, I see the EV as an innovation that is intimately and perhaps exceptionally dependent upon cycles of trust and distrust across many scales. Another aspect of that, though, is the broad relationship to the world. And here I'm drawing on the excellent work of Hartmut Rosa in his exploration of resonance, that is, a relation to the world of being related, or muteness, that is, a relationship to the world of being alienated or alone, excluded. And I think these things are so important to think about regarding e-mobility, because e-mobility is really only just beginning, and much of it is going to be about the digitalization of mobility, not just its electrification. So here I see e-mobility as not so much electric or electrified mobility, as rather electric enabled mobility. And with that in turn, just as the car is the acme, we call it Fordism after all, of the 20th century transformation of industrial capitalism, I can well imagine that e-mobility or electric enabled mobility, digital mobility, is going to play much the same role in the 21st century. So this is about the transformation of capitalism, and indeed even a whole new direction, phase, and type of innovation. What is that type of innovation? Pulling these two threads together, then, of the transition thinking and the phenomenological thinking, I think the first thing we need to look at is that this type of innovation is qualitatively new, because it revolves, or it involves and offers a qualitative coupling, a tightening of the coupling between the first person disposition to the world of the adopter, of the innovator, and then the specific direction in way in which these materialized reshaping of the world takes place, and especially regarding cities. So very crudely, a happy person sees the world in a particular way, therefore has particular needs and particular suggestions about what innovation is needed. That then is contributed back into society, and so there's a positive feedback loop. But equally, if we are alienated from the society and we are afraid, we will seek out innovations that further implement that. And I see e-mobility as being tightly interconnected with those dynamics. This indeed shapes whole senses and social relations of time and space, bringing it back to our question, even geographical and historical imaginaries and meanings. What do time and space actually mean to someone in the first, rather the left rather than the right hand mindset? And I think this really matters, because to go again, on the right, I think that leads to a darkening prospect, which will largely be self-fulfilling because of the innovation it elicits. Conversely, on the other side. So this is about taking responsibility for civilization and trying to move towards it, rather than being afraid always of its collapse. And again, regarding innovation and space and time, I think this points to particularly important aspects here about the irreducible future truthing of much of this innovation. It's what do we expect the world to be that makes the world what it will be. And equally, how it has, as we have this great sensitivity, this hypersensitivity to the nature of our relationship to the world, it brings about a particular placed, that is space character. So what does this all mean then, bringing it back to our question? Whither, that is, where to, is the emerging species that we are of Homo urbis going? I see e-mobility as a platform for this unprecedentedly tight feedback dynamic between ourselves and our cities. And this is already happening, I think, but where it leads depends entirely on what we now do with that dynamic, the extent to which we recognize it in the first place, and then how we choose to work with it. Unfortunately, in the absence of recognition of that dynamic, which is where I see things at the moment, I see the default is that the e-mobility will likely be a massive multiplier of pre-existing trends that is towards increasingly unequal and polarized worlds, with a default mood as it were, of distrust and securitization. And China is central to this dynamic, at least regarding e-mobility, not least because it is so exceptionally industrially committed in terms of its industrial policy, for instance, to the pursuit of e-mobility, but also because of the standout appetite amongst Chinese consumers for the digital aspect of mobility in particular. So putting this all together and finally returning to our questions, having done that under-laboring work, we can come back to what I see as emerging in terms of worlds of e-mobility in China. On the one hand, we have, I think, two basic models taking shape very clearly. There is firstly this discourse, the high-profile discourse about digital mobility, but this is a world that appeals and is open to largely an elite. And what's interesting about it is that, and this is still an idea that I'm toying with, but if David Harvey in the 1990s, writing about the emergence of globalization, talked about space-time distanciation and compression, I think we're seeing new forms of space and time as the digital and the physical come together, as they are most obviously in the shaping of cities by e-mobility. So instead here, I think we have a space-time homogenization or abstraction, the fact that for some people, it doesn't matter where they are always in the same place, as it were. And conversely, a tiering or a fractionating. So in the first instance, then, here we have EVs, on the one hand, do nothing to tackle congestion, even perhaps make it worse, but they become these homogenized spaces where someone, as it were, is able to move seamlessly without ever changing the environment that they're in. They become, as it were, a mobile elite environment. Perhaps we can even talk about the electric vehicle in this way being something that you actually put on and take off like a piece of clothing. On the other hand, though, e-mobility, and this is so obvious in China because the original e-vehicle in China, the great original success of Chinese e-mobility was the electric two-wheeler. But this is ubiquitous, even as it's often banned in the big cities, but amongst a different class, the precariat, the workers. And for them, these are people who are grappling, as it were, with the neglect of space-time by the fact that those in their elite environments can continue to move around easily in their digital hybrid space. And yet there is this return or revenge of space-time as well. So these are people who have to accept the physical risk. And then looking beyond the big cities to interregional, I think we see a similar distinction between the first-tier megacities and then these second-tier cities who are now accepting that the first-tier city is a simply unreachable world from there. It's a different place, that it moves at a different pace. And therefore, what we find in these other cities, which are also, of course, largely concentrated in Western and Central China, that low-speed vehicles are popular because they are simply slower places. So just to summarize this, we have here a diagram, which again I'm playing with, where this is, as I say, the settling out, the sedimenting into different fractions of mobility on the left hand. So the extent to which there is a smoothness or a coarseness of voluntary mobility or indeed immobility. It's the fact that you can do what you want. You can stay put if you want, you can move if you want. While on the other hand, this then is settling out into different as classes, effectively, of mobility. Just to wrap up then, I think this points to three implications and three key questions for future research. I don't think the question is, where is this headed? Because I think this is now taking shape. The question is rather, given that this is happening, what can be done about it? What is a plausible and implausible shift of this trajectory? What, in other words, you can see the arrows in the middle there. What are the margins that are able to be played with within that emerging system? Secondly, though, there is the question about even what is the normative here? What is good? If this is clearly a massively suboptimal world, right? But it's also one that perhaps is coming. This raises, and in any case, e-mobility is throwing things up. It is mixing things up. There is disruption. We must update our very concepts of normativity to be relevant to that new world. And then finally, what do we need to do? How can research contribute to this? So just to finish then, to conclude, I think we are in this moment of fundamental redefinition of multiple key common senses regarding cities, infrastructures, civilizations, space and time, and digitalizing e-mobility sits in a very sort of privileged place as a lens on those questions. And indeed, with Chinese socio-technical change central in turn. We have this new form of innovation, which we need to take responsibility for, this digital mirror-like innovation. And the default future of that, unfortunately, is one of high distrust and social economic polarizing. This is leading to new forms of space and time, homogenization and tiering as a locus and outcome of this change. And it needs new research, which I'm hope that I can work with some of you on in due course. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, for this very thought-provoking presentation. Listening from Chile, I think there are many things that are interesting to think about. I will remind our audience that you can send your questions through the chat function on Zoom, or also as a comment in the streaming that is now on YouTube. So let's move to our next speaker. Hayley Kwan Hieu Lap is a doctoral candidate in sociology at the University of Hong Kong. From 2019 to 2021, she served as Director of Development and Outreach for Hong Kong University's He for She for Us Gender Student Society. She also contributed to ICOMMON Hong Kong's organizing committee in 2020 and is currently part of the platform work for Inclusion Living Lab, PWIL, under a European Union cost action. Her research focuses on Marxist feminism, social reproduction theory, precarious gendered work, intersectionality, gig labor processes, and the platform economy and cooperativism. She is currently exploring intersectional vulnerability, labor struggles, and women's solidarity in China's ride-hailing industry, while also investigating the alternative organization of platform economy, such as digital commons and platform cooperatives. Please, Hayley, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria. So hello, thank you for having me today. My name is Hayley, and I'm a PhD student, and I'm very happy to engage in the discussions of Chinese driver and electric mobility in today's webinar. So my presentation topic is gendering electric mobility. So coming from a sociological background, electric mobility is a new concept for me because my research looks at women's work and platform labor. And my theoretical engagement focused on labor and gender theory. However, in response to today's topic, I revisit scholarship on feminist studies of technology, and hopefully my presentations will introduce some frameworks to understand time, space, and work in the study of electromobility. So in my following presentations, I will briefly introduce feminist studies of technology and illustrate how technology and work could be conceptualized in electromobility research. And based on my research on women's platform driver, I will offer my opinions on how time, space, and work could be understood in the electromobility studies. So feminist studies of technology look at the complexity of the relations between women, technology, and science. And starting from the 80s, feminist scholars explore the gender character of science and technology. So for example, Sandra Harding asked critical questions like how women can be equally treated within and by science, and how masculine projects in science can possibly be used for women's liberations. Moreover, Harding also concerned about women's access to technology and how technology is developed and used to constitute gender relations and identities. And interestingly, socialist feminist scholars also highlight the relations between women's work and technology, and engaging in a Marxist labor process approach debate about technology of productions. Socialist feminists see technology itself as crucially affected by the antagonistic class relations of productions. And the socialist feminist approach reveals that sexual hierarchy in the workplace and men's monopoly of technology are not incidental. So some empirical research conducted by Cockburn and Miltman demonstrate that women's exclusion from technology was a consequence of male dominations of skilled trade that developed during the Industrial Revolutions. So as a result, socialist feminist scholars do not see technology as value-free or neutral artifact. Instead, they believe that social relations, including gender and labor relations, are materialized in tools and technology. So the socialist feminist approach offers insight on technology and women's work, but it is pessimistic about the technological development and possibility of redesigning technology for gender equality. So in general, there's a lack of attention on women's agency. And having said that, feminist approach to technology studies are changing, and some feminist scholars are positive about the possibilities of information and communication technologies to empower women and transform gender relations. And some feminist scholars treat technology as a socio-technical product, like a seamless network combining artifact, people, organizations, cultural meaning, and knowledge. And technological change is always a contingent and heterogeneous process, and in which technology and society are mutually constitute. So inspired by feminist studies of technology, I see electromobility as a socio-technical product. So on the one hand, patriarchal gender relations and exploitative labor relations could be materialized in this technical object and infrastructure. But on the other hand, women's agency and solidarity are configured together with technology. So some women can take advantage of technology and create a solidaric network. And in the case of China, so the rise of a platform economy is impossible without technological advancement, such as smartphone, apps, electric vehicles, and GPS. And the technical objects and infrastructure create a lot of new job opportunities in urban city. So migrants in particular are very attracted to these ride-hailing and food delivery platform now. And similarly, like this platform work also attract a lot of female migrant workers. In my research, the majority of the female migrant workers are not highly educated, which affect their employment opportunity, and many of them could only work in the manufacturing and service industry. Moreover, many female platform workers are working class mothers, so they need to take care of their children while providing for the family. So as a result, female migrant workers are very attracted to ride-hailing platform because they want flexible working hour and higher incomes. So electric vehicles and smartphones are a game changer for these women. So EV basically changed how female workers' attitudes towards car ownership. For example, like some women, they believe that if they own a car, it will be an investment for them because the cost of maintaining an EV and EV charging are less expensive than the fuel and internal combustion engine. And also this increase their desire to possess a car. And also women platform driver could use their vehicles for multiple purposes, such as taking their children to school while working as a platform driver. And also the technical infrastructure, such as the use of smartphone, GPS, and apps, and also support women to be a platform driver. The cost of a smartphone is reduced, and many female platform drivers have more than 2 mobile phones. So this female platform driver can rely on GPS and ride-hailing apps on their smartphones for navigations. So electric mobility basically changed the way women perceive a car, and it actually opens up some platform-based work opportunity for women workers in China. So more women are driving as platform driver these days. However, it does not mean that women are empowered and gender relations are transformed in electric mobility work, such as ride-hailing driving. So female platform driver often experience gender discriminations from male drivers and passengers, even though more women are driving on the road in China. And also the discriminations of women platform driver reveals that technology is always gendered. And also many female platform drivers do not experience a strong sense of control over time and space. So despite the long charging hour and short range in EV car, female platform drivers are pressured to follow the algorithmic time and space management on their ride-hailing apps. So ride-hailing platform impose algorithmic control over labor time and space. So these women platform driver behavior and also productivity are disciplined by algorithm to some extent. And for example, a driver may be punished if she does not drive at a certain time, or a driver will be rewarded if she takes a ride at odd hours or in a remote area. So in general, women driver temporal and spatial experience is mediated by how much control they have towards the technical object and infrastructure, which are embedded in a very specific work relations and labor process. And last but not least, I believe that technological advancement aims at make people's life better. And if that's the case, so apart from focusing on the urgent discussions on sustainable energy and design of charging infrastructure and battery, so I hope that more research in electric mobility study can also reflect on the derived social problems and gender characters of technology. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Haley. It's very interesting to see the textures to the complexities underpinning work and gender in battery-dependent labor in the platform economy. And I can't stop thinking of you get on a car and they have all these mobile phones from the different platforms. So let's follow the batteries to other Chinese worlds of labor by listening to Pablo Ampuero Ruiz, Dr. Pablo Ampuero Ruiz. He is a postdoctoral researcher in the ERC worlds of lithium, where he has led the work package China. Pablo did his PhD in anthropology at the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology in Germany. And in his current research, he focuses on the socioeconomic and socio-technological transformations around the lithium industry in southern China and the financial entanglements that link extractivist regimes in South America, including Chile, Argentina, with capital and manufacturing hubs in East Asia and Central Europe. Please, Pablo, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria. And I'll try to jump directly into my presentation, but making the caveat that I think I'm going to be picking a few of the threads that both David and Haley open here, both in terms of how we relate to these technologies, but also how this, in terms of space and time, but also how this technology of e-mobility, electric-enabled mobility, is also transforming the practices of labor, certain practices of labor. So I'm going to try to also make those connections when possible. So my talk today is titled Powering Vehicles While Disempowering Workers, the double entendre of electromobility in Chinese worlds of labor. Although after further thinking, I think it's really a double entendre of power in this case, because it's both about political power and a little bit of those gender relations embedded in those gender relations that Haley was talking about, as well as the importance of electricity here and how electricity and its transformation into these devices, it's really playing a role in transforming the way we relate to them. So my slides are mostly images, a few words, but mostly images, and I just want to do some self-promotion that they were taken all by me last year in Shenzhen as part of my photo documentalist work as well. So I hope you enjoy them. So I will attempt to provide a picture of the challenges that electromobility is posing to battery-dependent labor, particularly taxi drivers and delivery workers. So it's different from the drivers that Haley was talking about, because these are regular taxi drivers in a regular blue taxi in the case of Shenzhen. I'm going to focus on these kind of challenges that emerge when we look at the world from the perspective of lithium-ion batteries for electromobility. The data that I use in this presentation has been collected during my time as a postdoctoral researcher in the ERC-funded project Worlds of Lithium, hosted at the Universiteit of Amsterdam, and that is also part of the organizers of this webinar. So let me start with a short story that I really like to share because it really shows a little bit of how my appreciation and my understanding of the interface of lithium-ion batteries with the reality of people and the city really came about. So I did my fieldwork for a few months in 2023 in the southern Chinese city of Shenzhen, which is a megalopolis of 15 million people that borders Hong Kong. And one of the approaches that I had into my methodologies was to try to follow lithium batteries. So every day I will come downstairs from my residence building in Futian, and I will just randomly pick a battery in front of me and start following it. This could have been an electric scooter, like in this case, behind a delivery worker, or a taxi or a car, or a person walking with their phones or recharging their phones while walking. I would just pick any battery, and a bit like a creep, I will just start walking behind the battery, not behind the person necessarily, but behind the battery. I was trying to see where the battery meets other interfaces or meets other infrastructures and people and so on. So I'll do my best to try to follow cars and motorbikes. You can imagine that it's very difficult. But the whole point is to see how the city unfolds for the battery. And so one of those days, I was walking, shadowing a delivery worker, and at some point I lost track of this person, and I said, okay, then I'm just gonna go back to one of my regular field sites, which was a recharging station. And just as I turn around, I see this image from the other side of the street. So it was a little bit further than what you see here. And I thought, why are they loading these really long bamboo sticks into the truck? That's how it looked to me from the other side of the street. And I got very curious because there was no bamboo around. So I cross the street and I get closer, and then I figure out, whoa, these are actually electric cables, massive electric cables that they take from underground, and they were changing them. So of course I hang out there for a bit and find the time to try to talk to one of these workers that you can see in this image, and also get a little close-up of the cables. These are absolutely massive. Like, each one of these cables about the diameter of my arm. This is absolutely massive cables. And well, I asked one of the workers, like, what's happening here? Why are you guys moving the cables? And he tells me that precisely because the massive amount of electric vehicles has created such a large demand for electricity in the city, they actually need more powerful cables to distribute the electricity around. So that means that the whole infrastructure of underground electric cables has to be overhauled for even more powerful ones with more copper in them. And this is where things become a little bit exciting, at least for me. Maybe for others it's not so exciting, but I come from Chile, which is a country that is one of the largest exporters of lithium and copper. So I found it really interesting that looking around and ghosting lithium, I actually found copper. But not only that, being in this place, it really opened my eyes to a whole new network of arrangements here, where labor takes a new dimension to me, charging time, charging spaces become much more relevant into the research. And a lot of those reflections have been published or are in the process of being published, and I will just focus on one of them here. So this experience made me think about lithium-ion batteries as a more complex set of relations, much more than the sum of a bunch of materials, but a critical junction of minerals, peoples, ideas, space, and time. And I think David did an excellent work on trying to put those stuff together in a very complex way, but very elegantly. And a version of that is what I want to interrogate today by asking, what are the implications of lithium-ion batteries for electromobility-bound labor? So I want to start by, again, promoting one of my concepts, the concept of moral power, which is my contribution or my perspective to highlight the role of moral narratives that mobilize political and economic action. So I see that narratives of environmental morality are very prevalent in, for example, European markets, but also North American markets, with individuals sometimes even change their behavior because they're pursuing a kind of moral high grounds. And I was coming from South America, maybe a little bit naive, but I was very shocked when I arrived in Germany, and I found that so many of my peers, of people around my age, were vegetarians or vegans just because they considered that through that practice, they were doing something for the environment. That was their conviction. So individual action can be taken through, as a way to demonstrate or manifest these narratives of environmental morality. So this not only affects individuals, but also companies and states that are seeking to gain these moral high grounds through the exercise of moral power. The problem is that this is sometimes used also to justify, particularly in the case of lithium-ion batteries and electromobility, the expansion of extractive industries around the world. And that's the narrative we have today. I mean, you just open any newspaper in the last three or 4 days, and the discussion about lithium pricing is very active again, and the importance of expanding projects of rare earth minerals, but also lithium and copper, in order to bring those materials to where they need to be, so the prices can remain relatively stable to make electromobility still affordable, are very present. So in order to achieve certain level of environmental sustainability, we need to expand extractive projects in this case, mostly in the global south. And that creates a whole new set of consequences. Cristóbal Bonelli, our host today, has been talking about micro disasters in the salt floods in the Atacama in the past. And there are a lot of environmental concerns connected to copper extraction and so on. So I see some tension in the narratives here that is important to keep in mind. And I also think that, similarly to what David was trying to argue in his presentation, that we're facing a conundrum here with the desire for a new energy in the case of China, right? They refer to electric vehicles as new energy vehicles, the desire for new energy does not necessarily reformulate the kind of power relations that we have even at an international level. So I talk about new energy with old dependencies, where the southern countries or the rentier economies of the global south remain in that position, albeit under a certain environmental morality narrative. So I think that particularly in the case of China, Chinese actors have been very strategic in combining the exercise of sovereign and moral power. And so by sovereign power here, I mean understanding energy as a matter of national security. So electromobility is part of the efforts of emissions reduction, but also of strengthening their national industries, economic growth, and a vehicle of national pride. So nowadays, especially when we have a lot of competition between EV brands in the Chinese context, one of the things that we found during fieldwork is that a lot of people are preferring to buy Chinese brands like NIO or the higher end BYDs compared to Teslas, because Teslas are a symbol of a foreign brand, whereas they think that their technology is already there, is already superior. And actually, in many regards, Chinese EVs are superior, especially if you look at the self-driving technologies. So moral power is also exercised to increase state capacity. So a lot of states, not only the Chinese states, this is true for most states around the world, deploy these moral narratives, but at the same time deploy disciplinary techniques to implement them. And well, David has talked about this in some papers in the past. But here I refer to the direct or indirect transfer of capital, for example, to the private sector, and the deployment of disciplinary techniques, for example, increasing taxes for internal combustion engines or to traditional gasoline, to create and expand the market of electromobility. Electromobility, the level of extension that electromobility has reached today would not be possible without the role of the state. And that's something I have written about. So I want to present you here a few interesting cases that illustrate my point about the relation between electromobility and work. Shenzhen is the way that it portrays itself, or its authorities portray it, is that it's a model city of socialism with Chinese characteristics, but also is a model city of ecological civilization. Nowadays, Shenzhen has 100% of its public transportation is electric. This, of course, brings lower emissions in transportation, which is great. And I was very surprised last year to be in Shenzhen and feel quietness in the middle of the city. Like it's really not that loud as it used to be. But we do not really have a comprehensive understanding of how workers, for example, are relating to their new means of mobility and the challenges they are facing. One of these first situations is, for example, the case of taxi drivers who spend a lot of time in these recharging stations every day. And these recharging stations are becoming increasingly new spaces of socialization and commensality. On the one hand, their vehicle technology requires about 1 to 2 hours a day of recharging time, which is not time that they are making money for. That means that their working day needs to be extended for that extra 1 or 2 hours in order to make the same income as they were making with internal combustion engines, which in a context of economic slowdown, you can understand that this is not a good situation. So we heard a lot of complaints from taxi drivers that were using their electric cars, and they were unhappy about this situation. Most of the electric cars used for taxi drivers are provided by the company BYD in Shenzhen. There's an agreement between the city and the companies to provide BYD taxis at a more cheaper price. And the model is the E6, which has been designed initially to be a taxi car, but now is also being sold for private use. So I spent a lot of time talking with them, having lunch with them, and spending time in these charging stations, like the one you can see in this image, listening to these complaints. So in the case of taxi drivers, we have a situation where the use of the taxi, of course, is reducing emissions, but it's also extending their working day involuntarily. It's not something they can do anything about. But as I was just telling you a second ago, these are also new spaces for commensality and socialization, because unlike the internal combustion engine, where recharging it or putting gas on it takes about a minute or two, in the case of electric cars, it requires more time. And there is a common situation in China where, for example, company CEOs or people in higher hierarchies do have a driver, and the drivers need to hang out their free time. They need to hang out in these recharging stations. So you find now that this is also becoming a space for new entrepreneurialism with street food, delicious street food, by the way, that I had to eat a lot for scientific purposes. And it's also a new space for conversations. And here again, you come back and hear a lot of these complaints about how slow the cars recharge, or people being concerned about the safety of the cars as well, because there are a lot of stories around about cars that light on fire. And then we also have the case of delivery workers and the intensification of their working day. In this case, they're using the electric two-wheeler that David was talking about. And well, their rates, their income really depends on the amount of deliveries they can do and in the time that they can do them. So one of the really interesting things I found in my fieldwork was these cabinets that you can see here in this image, where the driver can actually exchange an empty battery for a fully charged one. And in just about a minute, the electric scooter driver, in this case, delivery workers mostly, can be back on their way. So what happens in this situation is that these green technologies, this technology of mobility, is increasing is facilitating the self-exploitation by minimizing charging times. So these workers are not encouraged to take breaks or to hang out or to even have a meal, because the more deliveries they can do, the more money they can do, and that's of course better. So in this case, the technology is again generating new constraints or more complications to the well-being of labor. So battery-powered mobility has an impact on the way taxi drivers and delivery workers perform their tasks, but not only. On the one hand, we have charging time creates new conditions, and here we have a problem with slow charging, but also with immediate battery swaps. And space, a big concern of both of these workers is the range that they can drive, how far they can go. And that also creates consequences to their income. So this is also a concern as well for consumers of electromobility at large, and people that go and buy electric cars will have these two elements into consideration. How fast can I charge it, and how far can I go? So here kind of makes me think and reflect a little bit further who benefits from battery charging inequalities in this case. And I like to talk about these battery inequalities. So just to sum up and start closing, the present of environmental morality driving the expansion of electromobility poses us with a double entendre in terms of power here. On the one hand, we have battery powered transportation that reduces urban emissions and is bringing improvements in air quality and noise pollution. But on the other, we are also meeting disgruntled workers that do not see an improvement in their material conditions of existence necessarily after the introduction of this technology. I think that this should invite us to look beyond the commonplaces linked to electromobility, which are usually narratives about a desirable and automatized future. In the present context, and here I'm taking David's call, I think. So in the present situation, what can we do? Well, electromobility is introducing new forms of inequality and exploitation that we at least need to be aware of. These are charging time as a factor of social differentiation. So the elite access, the elite mobility will have immediate charging times, as we can see already. But the worker electromobility will not, most likely will not. But also productivity is being mediated by electric charging capabilities. So as a closing reflection, I want to insist that when we imagine the present of energy transitions, assuming that they are actually ongoing, all of these transformations are then happening simultaneously. And that's why I think it is important to give more space to reflections about, for example, justice, because someone is getting the short end of the straw here. So the battery then becomes an opportunity to think from it, to theorize about the path our societies are following, and hopefully to emancipate the frontiers of our collective imagination. And that's a little bit of the work we have been trying to do together collectively at the ERC Walls of Lithium. And I just gave you a little glance of the China section on it. So thank you very much. Looking forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Pablo, for a very interesting presentation with great pictures, I must say. And also to think like how power and electromobility can be seen through the cases of taxi drivers and delivery workers and inequality. It's been very interesting, 3 presentations. They do have points in common, but also maybe some differences. I would like to know what you think about that. So we're going to move to questions from the audience, also questions from our panelists, if you would like to do questions to each other. And I would like to start with a maybe not a, yeah, it's a question really, but it's interesting to think about electromobility against the grain. Green is good. Well, maybe not. What is good, you know, and how we think about that. And I thought it was interesting what Pablo was saying about people being vegan in this context. And also because the idea of electromobility has been usually seen in very, very positive terms. It's a good thing, right? Noise goes down, less emissions. But being in Chile and thinking, for example, that lithium is extracted from here and what's happening with environment locally with the extraction of lithium brings another aspect to it. So my first question is like what has been expected in this maybe e-revolution and what has followed, sort of like what has been expected of the challenges that this brings, but also what has not. Is there anything that is surprising in how electromobility is developing? It's a broad question, but maybe you can reflect from your own topics. Another question has to do with time, and this is also for the 3 of you. Pablo mentioned the extension of the working day. And if we think of that through gender, who's taking care of others, because that's also very linked to gender, and not only linked to gender, but like gendered roles in terms of care. How does that come into the equation? And also Pablo mentioned that workers' charging time is slower, but I think it will accelerate. So what happens in this like continuous acceleration, or will there be that or not? And also linked to work and also to the 3 of you, deliveries. I find that deliveries is a very interesting aspect of it, and especially when one thinks of that figure that David showed us about how green, what this E means, you know, for the worker and for time. And we think of weather conditions, for example, and people complaining that there are no deliveries under extreme weather conditions because there's nobody wanting to work, you know. So what happens with those demands linked also to inequality? So we would start with those maybe three, if you could reflect on those questions while we get questions from the audience, which we remind you can do by YouTube or also on Zoom. Thank you. I don't know who would like to start, maybe Bob?
Perhaps I can go
and then David.
first.
Yeah.
As I just finished the presentation, I'm still in the energy with the adrenaline of it. So I think in the case of China, I think there is under the framework of ecological civilization of Shanghai Wenming, there has been a special consideration for the role of technology into achieving particular green goals. And not only there is a lot of optimism, technological optimism to, for example, reduce emissions, but also into achieving certain material life standards of material life through technologies. And this is very clear in vehicle technology, in EV technology, where there is a lot of optimism and a lot of investment into what EVs can achieve and what they can do, not only for people and consumers, but also for the country as a whole. So there is a narrative, a state level, where it has been defined very early that while China did not have a very strong industrial position and economic position in the car industry, when electromobility started to develop, they defined that this could be it. So there was a lot of investment put in, and they certainly managed. And they have developed a very complex strategy to facilitate the development of these technologies, the competition between these car giants in China. I mean, we have probably 3 or 4 massive brands nowadays in China in terms of share value, but you have the landscape, the EV landscape is tremendously dynamic in China. So you have so many brands emerging every year and also disappearing every year. So there's a lot of competition, and I think one of the things that and hope that this will work, and it's certainly doing so. I mean, the fact that now the tariffs have been increased in the US and in Europe against Chinese EVs is evidence that the Chinese EVs are doing something in this field. Now, what was not expected is precisely, I think, the type of things that David, Haley, and I were showing here about certain inequalities. And one of the interesting things that I like to highlight here is that the introduction of these technologies does not happen in a socioeconomic vacuum, but actually in a very clear context in the case of China, where there are material inequalities, regional inequalities, that cannot be solved by this technology, but it actually kind of it is applied on top of it. So the texture that we see now on the way that this technology is unfolding, it's telling a lot about what this technology is doing and who is winning and who is losing from it. So that's kind of where my reflection was aiming as well. And here, just to connect the other points very briefly, here's when we see those gender inequalities flourishing up as well. I think Haley has much more to say about that than me, but at least in what I could observe, there is an overwhelming majority of male workers in these fields. And female workers are mostly relegated to care tasks. And those that are working, they still need to do those care tasks. So those that are drivers, those that are e-hailing drivers or taxi drivers, or those women that are delivery workers, they still need to perform their care tasks. So that it provides an extra burden on them, and that's why they're also discriminated in the labor market. And about accelerating charging times, I think maybe you're more optimistic than me on this, but I think we will not reach a level of equal charging times between premium brands and non-premium brands or models. That will remain fictionally so, because of elitism, because these are markers of differentiation. But certainly the technology is there and is moving forward, and it's making charging times shorter. But I think it will still remain a significant difference.
Haley
Could I?
or
Okay,
David?
Haley, go.
David, whichever. David.
Okay. I'll just say a few words. Thank you. They're really excellent questions. This question is anything surprising about how e-mobility is unfolding? That's a really great question. I'm going to carry on pondering that over the weekend. But I think probably the first thing that springs to mind, and particularly in the Chinese context, is the persistence of electric two-wheelers, and the regionalization, the regional persistence of the low-speed vehicles. I mentioned earlier that the original electric vehicle success in China, clearly visible over a decade ago, was in these vehicles. In fact, at that time, because they're slower, because they're cheaper, because they don't need enormous infrastructure build, it seemed to me that this was, and therefore, of course, they're easy to sell also globally to the whole world, not just to the rich world. It seemed to me like this would be a good strategy for China to pursue if it wants to be sort of kingpin in electric mobility. But in fact, the opposite happened, at least at the official level, which was that these vehicles started to be penalized and even banned from city centres. That doesn't mean they've disappeared, but it means that they're there on suffrage. It's like the HUCO system, the household the permit, which is that they don't give you the HUCO in order to keep you in a permanent place of precariousness. So it doesn't mean you have to leave. It just means that if they want to, they can stop you. And yet these vehicles have absolutely not gone away. In fact, what's happened is that I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that e-mobility has in the round, not just in cars, but in electric two-wheelers and buses, the whole system, China is clearly the most developed in terms of forming a system of e-mobility, shaped around e-mobility. And what we see there, as in Pablo's wonderful photographs and described wonderfully by Haley, is a very clear emergence of, as it were, a division of electric mobility labor. That there are effectively the served and the servers by electric mobility. And the servers, some of those servers are the drivers and the taxi drivers and the ride-hailing drivers. And some of them, probably a lot more, are on two-wheeler electric two-wheeler deliveries. And the modern Chinese city, Shenzhen, would ground to a halt without these vehicles. So they clearly are still needed. And I think that's probably a surprise to at least the designers of Chinese electric mobility policy. The other thing I would say, just on the back of that, another surprising thing is simply the domination, the fact that China, I mean, as I said, I've just been to a conference which was in Oslo, Norway, a famous example also of I think it's as early as next year now, 2025, they're not going to be selling new ICE cars. So penetration is going to be 100% soon on new vehicles in Norway. But it's actually indistinguishable from any other European city. You just have cars that are quiet. That there's no real evidence of it being an electric mobility transformation in Oslo. But you can't ignore it. It's obvious especially in a big city like Shenzhen in China. So I think that itself also is a surprise. At least if we go back 10 years, it's a surprise. The final thing I wanted to say, and I suppose it's maybe it leads up to a question maybe to Pablo in due course, is I was fascinated by this idea of people having to sit around for hours at a day to do the charging. And I just wonder to what extent that leads to the opportunity for organization amongst these drivers. My guess is that it does not, because there is such a political taboo on that kind of unionization. But who knows? Maybe there's a sting in the tail there. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Good question for Pablo. Haley.
Yes. I'm thinking about the questions on, for example, the charging time, and is a slow charging time a very bad things happen to worker? I think it is not very good, but I don't think it's that bad according to my own observations, because, for example, the woman driver in my studies, so for those charging time, they actually utilize it for doing a lot of different tasks. For example, they spend time with their family, and also they are using, like, for example, Douyin, TikTok, it's kind of like a leisure, like refreshing themselves through social media, or some of them even doing broadcasting. So it's like they're another job, like they're actually platform driver and also digital labor. So they use all this time, like this charging time, to actually do other stuff, which is not that bad for this female driver from my observations. But of course, like some of them are actually really tired, so they actually sleep during this charging time. And most of the time, like they were saying, oh, they wish that they could sleep longer, because after like finish charging, they have to start working again. And also, like, when they work, when they drive around, it's not guaranteed that they always have order or right. So the time that they're driving in a city could be just a waste of time as well. But during charging, they have a sense of control on, like, or they can make use of the time, how they use the time during the charging, because they know its charging time is 2 hours, so they know how they can use the time. But actually during the work hours, they have less sense of control over time. So that's a very personalized opinions on this charging time and how worker perceive the charging time. And regarding the extensions of the workday, and also about gender role in care work. So actually I agree with Pablo that actually a lot of these platform worker, no matter it's ride hauling or delivery worker, actually they have to work whole day. So it means that their social reproduction time is reduced. And if they don't have a family, they can just eat out. Like they do those street food, takeaway, eating in a worker canteen, driver canteen all the time, or they're sleeping in the car. So they can reduce their social reproductive time and space to this minimum. But if they have a family, especially for female, for example, female platform worker, they cannot reduce this time, social reproduction time, because they have to take their children to school, prepare a meal for their kids, and also clean the house. And all of this involve a lot of like domestic labor time. And even though they're working, they still have to do this kind of double burden in terms of pay work and unpaid work. And that's the gender reality in China these days. So it's still not improving a lot. And also the extension of the working day. I feel like I don't have a very specific like observations or detailed observation on that, but it is extending. Like when I start my study 4 years ago or 5 years ago, and the working time are less longer than now. So this female driver works longer every day compared to 4 and 5 years ago. And I'm not sure about it is because of the charging time or because of the charging infrastructure is insufficient for them or what. But I feel like more like it is the ride hauling apps, like the app that they're working for, actually control their time and also manage their time, because they earn so less now per ride. So they have to work longer and accepting more order in order to make the same amount of money like before the pandemic or before like 4 or 5 years ago. So I feel like it is also the extension of the working day is also like in relations to the working apps, like the work relation that they're involved in, apart from the electric mobility infrastructure or the charging infrastructure. So I think all this may play a role in determine how long workers will extend their working day in this kind of platform-based work. And yeah, I think that's for now for me.
Haley, I just want to add, there's a question in the chat which you have really just answered.
Okay.
But they also added something that I thought maybe you could develop a bit further, which has to do in terms of space. Is there places to which movement is restricted or not? How do you see that in terms of EV as well?
Oh, for example, if some female driver in maybe second or third tier cities in China, so maybe they have to drive to rural area at night or at midnight. Some of them might hesitant because if they worry about the space is actually not safe at night within the car and also outside in that rural area at a very late hour. But because it is an EV car, so actually one of my driver informant, like she actually goes even though it's really late and it's a bit dangerous for her. She feels like, but she's still willing to go because it's an EV car. And the reason is that because it has aircon and everything, so she basically can lock herself in the car after she delivered the passengers, and then she can sleep in the car and turn on the aircon and stuff like that. So she's not that afraid to go to a rural area because she knows she can sleep somewhere else in the car, and she feels safer in the car. So in that sense, but if it is a fuel car, maybe it's not possible because you have to turn off the engine if you really have to stop the car. So I think it actually encouraged them to go to this rural area and drive to this very rural space, a very distant space with this EV car. But this is just one example. It's not a very generalizable example, but it's just one example that I can think of.
Great. I can follow up that with, I'm trying to gather some questions and to come up with a general question for all of you that deals with this distinction or tension between the abstraction of the digital worlds in contrast to the materiality or these material worlds that are unequally expanding, no? Which was nicely brought up by David when he spoke about the first person, the phenomenological first person position, no? As if this sort of like a digital abstract world that is related to the automation dynamic, so to speak, might be killing like the first person of the phenomenological voice. No, it's like there is progressively this expansion of inequality in which the first person that can be the we person, the collective person, is being mute somehow, progressively. So the question here, and is a bit about what Hallie was talking about, but the reverse of what you were saying is like, if we're thinking about electromobility, it's how can we think about political movement? Or how can we rethink about movement in terms of like the classic idea of social movements, since we are now in South America, or like social movements are very important here in South America. So how can we think through these electromobility worlds, the possibility to craft some sort of like, to try to conceptualize the possibility of the emergence of some sort of social movement. In particular, a social movement that might be capable to adopt these technologies, rather than thinking like in the more romantic vision of social movements as trying to act outside of technology. So that's a general question for you all.
Maybe I'll start because I think this can link nicely with David's question as well about the potential for drivers to organize themselves while hanging out in these new spaces of commensality and while we're waiting for the cars to charge. The truth is that in that space, it's not really feasible to do that, and there are many reasons for that. And I will give you just two that are important. One is, just as Haley remarked, a great deal of drivers just sleep in their cars while they can. And I had a lot of images of legs coming out of a window or because the driver is sleeping inside, or they clean their cars, or they go to eat. Some stations have actually like an open a canteen where the drivers hang out and eat. Others might go to a small restaurant around or eat outside with one of these little carts that is also electric. That three-wheeler that I showed in the image is also an electric three-wheeler that is moving around the city with the food. I think that's one of the reasons. So people are really into their own worlds in one way, and that is also enabled by another battery that is in a phone. So they also spend a lot of time on their phones, on Douyin, for example, just consuming content or producing content. And the other one, particularly for the case of taxi drivers, but also for e-hailing workers, for e-hailing drivers, the union is playing a very active role in trying to keep an eye on the situation. When I was in Shenzhen, there was this campaign for unionizing delivery workers and e-hailing drivers within the framing of the All China Federation of Trade Unions. So because they cannot really be unionized by that union because they do not have like working contracts, they are not proper workers, Gongren. They created a new kind of experiment. They're experimenting with new forms to bring them together into some sort of union that operates a little bit like an NGO. And for example, in the case of e-hailing workers, and the companies themselves that are selling their services to the app with the cars and the drivers, they have the union. So the managers are at the same time CEO of a company, but also union leaders. And they do this as a way to provide training or or making certain that the drivers will not leave, creating certain sense of belonging as well. So there are a lot of different things happening here that we can call techniques of coercion in a way, or hegemonic building. So that create difficulties to that sort of organization. But I think bringing again to Cristobal's point, I think what is really important for me in the way that I have approached this research is to see to what extent electromobility is also capturing certain kind of imagination. And I really prefer to talk about the present of electromobility instead of the future of electromobility, precisely because I feel that electromobility is not posing necessarily something new. And it's really hard to talk to, for example, investors or policymakers or even people in social movements and try to convince them to think with electromobility about new possibilities. So what is beyond electromobility? What does electromobility promise to us that we can actually use as an emancipatory project? And I feel that David was kind of complaining and saying this is just a car that is silent or it doesn't really change anything. And I really feel that very closely. I feel that EVs are kind of a technological solution that enables the extension in time of capitalism instead of allowing us to think beyond it. So the way that this is being configured in our current reality is giving a little bit more of breathing time to what I believe is a dying system. And I came to this realization in a moment that I was walking in the Shenzhen City Museum, in the double museum in the city center, which is at the same time a museum of the history of Shenzhen and a museum of contemporary art, And they have an exhibition, and there was a sentence that came from the three-body problem, from the book, The Three-Body Problem, but from the second or third book. And the sentence goes something like, just trying to remember it, but it's something like, don't give time to civilization, let civilization give time to the present, or something like that. And the whole idea behind that sentence, and the context in which it is in the book, is that new technologies are used to enable the continuation of a system, whereas a proper, I think, new ontological project should consider the possibility of things not being given, but of emancipating and opening them up in different new directions. And that's what I think is not really happening, and it's something that us as scholars, in a way, with a particular knowledge of a particular context, which is an industrialized reality, very developed kind of reality, particularly in the case of Shenzhen, for example, we can use to mobilize those ideas into different other contexts. I know that, for example, the discussion we're having today here might said very differently if we were having it with activists in the Atacama Desert, where Cristobal is right now stationed, where their concern is about, are we going to take the resources out of the land or not? So these different contexts open up different conversations, but at the end of the day, it's the technology in itself that is enabling them. And it's up to us if we're going to try to imagine something new, or we're going to remain with the same
great provocation. David and Hallie, do you want to jump in there?
Hallie, do you want to go first this time?
Okay, I will go first. When I think about the questions of electromobility and also potential social movements, and also how technology can be adopted instead of eliminated in today's time. So I'm thinking about the example from my study. So it's not, I think the first opinion I offer is not directly related to electromobility, but more about platform drivers. So in my case, like platform driver actually have their own network, and they create also a lot of this kind of WeChat groups. So they actually offer a lot of help among these drivers, and also they actually fight for some harassment, discriminations, and even gender-based violence through this communication technology. And also they actually form a very solidarity network through this communication technology. So I think in terms of platform work, there's still potential for organizing in terms of how these platform workers are using the social media and also communication technology to organize. So so that is the first opinion. And then second is about imagining alternative forms of how electromobility can be applied in daily life. And from my own imaginations, so I think it would be possible to think about if we don't see EV in a capitalist system, for example, capital relations in terms of how labor are being organized, then maybe there's a potential of make EV in a good use. Because when like all these new technology are being contextualized in a capitalist system, it's always for capital accumulations. It's always for making more money and more money. It's never about the people, right? So I'm thinking maybe there's emerging trends and also research on cooperatives. So like all these different forms of platform co-ops that actually start to gain more popularity and also recognitions from scholars, and also from all these NGOs and also social campaign. I think it might be another possible way out for EV or electromobility development. And when I think about, for example, ride hailing and so and also food delivery in China, so actually the use of EV are actually good in a sense that it lower the cost of like the charging and lower the cost of maintaining a car. So it gives workers opportunity to work outside the service industry in terms of like traditional service industry, and also work outside the manufacturing industry. So they enjoy a greater sense of mobility and freedom. For these, for example, women drivers, they're actually very happy about it, but it's about the working condition. It's about the labor relations that, and they're actually being embedded, which is a very exploitative capitalist labor relation, and that's why it's not very beneficial for them. So I'm thinking if more like cooperative and also more like I would say that more grassroots campaign and also more business model are more geared towards this cooperative model, like worker lead platform work. Maybe it might be a very different scenario. And I'm very like I'm not that pessimistic, so I will be hopeful for that. Yeah. And that's it.
Okay, so I'll just say a few words because I realize we're at time now. So just very quickly, this has been a very inspiring discussion. So thank you, everybody, for the questions and for the feedback from the others as well. What strikes me so clearly, and I must admit in a way that it's never really leapt out at me before, is the way in which e-mobility is currently forming in a way that is quite obviously conditioned by and heading towards at least an attempted revitalization of capitalism. That seems to me to be absolutely apparent. And one of the things, so just 2 quick points on that. The first thing is that it's really obvious to me that the way in which e-mobility is emerging as an industry it is profoundly different to Fordism in the mid-20th century. And in that Fordism was emerged at a moment of already well sedimented industrial capitalism, corporations, lots of collective labor, whereas the very building of these cars is going to become less and less involving of large numbers of collective labor. There's more and more robots in the factories that makes these vehicles, and then nobody needs to tell the factory workers that they can afford to buy these cars in a way that was the whole promise of Fordism. So I think the key to that is precisely to see that electric mobility is an instantiation already of the digital economy. And by the digital economy, I mean that the analogy there is very much more with the early 19th century rather than the early 20th century, where it is about individualized opportunity on the basis of new, what we now call platforms. And for the time being, as we've heard so vividly from Haley and from Pablo, there remains great opportunity for those who are being welcomed into being this new server class, this new e-mobility server class, because it's still a step up for them from what the alternative is. So they're prepared to take this individualized e-mobility option, even as in my diagram, it means them accepting all kinds of forced mobility, or at least involuntary mobility and immobility. It's still an improvement for the time being. So I think what we need to understand is that we are, again, at the very early stages of the transformation, capitalism, of society, of cities, by e-mobility and the digital transformation that will bring with it. And perhaps the analogy, or at least the starting point, is to say that, you know, it took nearly a century for there to be meaningful unionization and socialism as a meaningful political prospect. It wasn't until the late 19th century, really, that this was a thing. Even if there were already socialists in the early 19th century, the social conditions and the material conditions were not there yet to support it, nor was the system yet there before everybody in order to be able to exploit that. So the arc of justice might be long, to put it that way. But perhaps it does, in fact, bend towards justice. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. I will just take 1 minute to say thank you to David, Pablo, and Haley for this fascinating conversation. We will continue thinking during the weekend about working conditions and the environment, right? Inequality and ultimately power, and see how it goes. And we will hope to remain optimistic. Thank you very much, Cristóbal and Pablo, for organizing these sessions.
Yes, and thank you, Maria, and all the people from ECOLOGICAL who we have been working with, and so we are coming to an end of this webinar series that we've been organizing also with Pablo, who today was also a speaker. So thanks in a double way. And thank you, David, Haley, and to all the speakers of these webinars, and to our ERC, of course, that made possible this possibility. And this is just the opening conversation, right? For about the starting point of, as David was just saying, like the beginning of a potential transformation that we know very, very little about. So I just want to thank you all, and to remind you that all these webinars will be hosted in our website and in the YouTube channel of our project. And so we invite you to keep an eye on our website, because we will continue organizing initiatives like this one in the future, hoping also that these conversations allow for new networks to emerge. So also thank you to the producers that are behind the screens, and hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.